And it all has to, everything has to work well to get integrated into the narrative. We can't just willy-nilly act. Everything we're doing is we're trying to keep the world grounded and believable. It all make logical sense. And we feel like that's how we can best immerse the player in this journey.
What makes a good game? Is it the gameplay, the story, graphics? Maybe it has nothing to do with these things. Or maybe it's all of them. I know it sounds like a really stupid question, and it probably is. But really ask yourself, what makes that game good? Why did I enjoy that so much? Why did I hate this? Think about the different elements that shape those opinions. It should be all about that initial experience and subsequent reflection. At this point, we're starting to review the game in question, but this is just the very beginning. I want to dive deeper and focus on video game reviews when it comes to their positive and negative impacts, review methods, scoring methods, things to acknowledge, questions to ask yourself, and video game elements. Obviously, there are so many things that you have to keep in mind when both creating and consuming a review on something, and this brings me to my first review method. Games are built upon a variety of elements, and sometimes you want to break everything down and discuss those specific elements. There's really two parts to this. One looks at more general elements, while the other hones in on each of them, branching off into extremely specific subsets. The first part deals with what I consider to be the four main aspects of a game: story, gameplay, visuals, and sound. And this method seems to be pretty common among reviewers. Sure, they may not always explicitly break those sections apart for separate discussions in their review, but I think they at least use this idea as a way to discuss the overall experience of a game and what it has to offer. It might be the most normal way to review a game. The second part of this method is when reviewers take it a step further and break down every single detail of every single element. This includes things like voice acting, the feel of the controls, the pacing, the facial animation, the fit of the soundtrack, the challenge, and so much more. This is a design I made that showcases how that element branching may look. It does its best to explain everything for the reader so that they can get a better understanding of every single thing the game has to offer and how it all works together. I still think that it's extremely important that the reader or viewer sees the game and at least some of those details that are being discussed, so then they can visually judge for themselves. But nothing will beat actually playing it, experiencing it, and forming your own opinion that way. Now, when it comes to balancing those different game elements and how you review each of them for a specific game, it's entirely up to you to decide how you feel the game's experience benefits from each of them. Maybe Heavy Rain or Until Dawn don't have great detailed gameplay, but they do have interesting stories because that's what they want to focus on. Their narratives. How does that balance out though? This is where it can get very subjective, and sometimes you shouldn't worry about being so specific. Just think about that overall experience. Everyone will always have their own opinion. It's very important to keep this in mind. Readers and viewers should always try to have an open mind about everything because I believe that every experience is at least worth trying or checking out. More often than not, people need to judge for themselves. The second main method for reviewing is the more organic and natural essay. This is when reviewers let their thoughts on a game more or less flow out of them, moving from subject to subject with ease. I feel like this gives the review more character, personality, and flow. It allows the review to feel so much more genuine and be led by experiences both positive and negative. They don't really mention anything unless they feel that they need to. So for me, those are the two main methods of reviewing: separating elements and organic discussions. A couple of other extra methods I thought of include listing pros and cons, discussing specific experiences encountered in the game, and answering different questions, such as what did the game want you to feel? Did it succeed at that? How so? This sums up the experience in an interesting way. Here's an example with Naughty Dog's The Last of Us. This game focuses on attempting to make the player feel like they are just scraping by, just barely making it through every situation, outnumbered and struggling to survive with what they have left. It may be a good idea to ask a lot of these questions. How does the game feel? How does the game make you feel? Who is it a game for? What was exciting? What was boring? How does it compare to similar games? Let these questions start to guide your thoughts on a game. A really crucial one to hit on is, how do we judge different games? They can be so different with their experiences, and we have to realize that it's all about how we ourselves connect to those experiences. On October 19th, 2019, the Game Informer Show podcast had Ben Hansen talk to Game Informer's reviews editor Joe Juba about how to write a video game review. During the video, Juba mentions how as a reviewer you have to recognize that this is all your opinion. It is all about your experiences. Did you like the game? Why or why not? The process can start as simple as that. He also talks about how it's important to think about the review from other perspectives as well, especially if you're biased. This could include a reviewer's familiar history with a series, a developer, or even a genre. I would say to try your best to be objective on what you can be objective about, which is most likely the facts. Stuff like, this game has a 12-hour story, there's 8 multiplayer maps, there's 25 unlockable skills, and so on. It's up to you to determine whether or not some of these things are important in a review. So don't forget to be thorough, fair, and honest. Embrace the subjectivity. I think this level is a lot of fun to explore. I think the visuals have a pleasant style. I think the movement feels really smooth. I think the gameplay is really rewarding. Talk about your personal experiences with the game. What happened with you and why? It's absolutely incredible how people can take the same thing and have completely different reactions and feelings about it. And make sure to think about the different criticism types as well. Passive, aggressive, neutral. Criticism is healthy and criticisms need reasons. Bottom line it for people. Now there's about 5 main scoring methods I could think of, first of which is the infamous point score system, and this has to be by far the most popular one. With my research, I found a great video talking about this exact sort of stuff. The 48th episode of the Kinda Funny Gamescast uploaded on December 9th, 2015. So if you don't know, Kinda Funny is an online entertainment company that creates content in the form of videos and podcasts that focus on video game culture, film, television, and comics. In this particular episode, Greg Miller and Colin Moriarty, both formerly of IGN, discuss video game review scores. Miller stated that when scoring games at IGN, he would make comparisons to other more similar games in terms of score to figure out which one edged out the other. He gave Uncharted Drake's Fortune a 9.1, Infamous a 9.2, and Batman Arkham Asylum a 9.3, because in his opinion, he thought Infamous was a little better than Uncharted, and Batman was a little better than Infamous. That's how he utilized the decimals. But the main problem with this, as he pointed out, was that these scores didn't represent him. They represented IGN. And so the way he did his own scores may seem a bit off and strange when compared to other IGN reviewers' scores. This is also an issue that Video Game Donkey highlights in his video on game critics. Early on at IGN, according to Miller, there was no strict gatekeeping for publishing reviews. IGN would just say to publish it. But of course nowadays they're no longer like this anymore.
Versus where it was when I started. Because I always tell the story of when I first started, wrote my first review, finished it, walked over to Roper, and I was like, hey Roper, my review's done. He goes, all right, publish it. And I was like, do you want to read it? Is there a proof? Is there a copy editor? And he's like, nah, I just put it up. I'm sure you read it. And I was like,
Thankfully, it seems that reviews are evolving into opinions and videos with more discussion instead of numbers, especially with the amount of independent reviewers that are out there now. I still feel like most people need to shift their focus from the score to the discussion because that's what matters most. Not a number that this particular reviewer gave based on their opinion, but you need to see it all and understand it all for yourself. Don't let a number immediately set your expectations for something. This should be a noticeable problem for everyone.
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
Later on in the Kinda Funny Gamescast, Colin Moriarty says that reviews need to be read through the lens of subjectivity, especially when there's a lack of cross-referencing between the scales of different outlets and the numbers become meaningless because of this. For example, Eurogamer was notorious for giving really low scores, but according to Moriarty, their scoring rubric seems to be a lot more reasonable, and IGN is the exact opposite, being known for giving most games a higher score. Moriarty goes on to say that the only thing that you can take away from reviews is what's being said in the review itself, and there's no objective way to review a game. In his opinion, he also says that the way the game plays is super important. The way games feel to play is why we play games. But someone else may put story above gameplay, and that can lead to two completely different reviews that came to the same arbitrary number. One important thing to note is that more focus should be put on the desire of the consumer. We may think that they want scores, but maybe we could train them to move from the reductive nature of scoring over to something more thoughtful. You can't possibly know how a person feels just by boiling it down to a number. Reading the content of the review can be more informative, and you can find more enlightening things about a game this way.
Heads up! I'll take that. Let's cut through here.
The next scoring method is a word score based on consumer terms, so something like buy, wait for sale, rent, never touch, sell, or is it worth a buy? It's intriguing because this directly speaks to the consumer. Sure, it still doesn't solve the subjectivity issue, and frankly, I don't think anything will. The only thing that comes close to this is reading the actual review, watching the actual gameplay, thinking about how you would like the game yourself. Another scoring method could just be the simple word or sentence score that focuses on summing up the game in the best way possible. Here's an example for Sucker Punch's Infamous. Cole's powers are cool, the graphic novel cutscenes are stunning, the story is intriguing, and the city is alive. That was one of the last sentences in the written IGN review by Greg Miller, who used it to best summarize the game for the reader, and I would love to see this focused on more often. The last few scoring methods I quickly thought of are letter grades, percentage scores, and no scores. Percentage scores are practically like point scores. The no score idea is something that I think should be more widely adopted because sure, people see numbers, people see scores, but this will get people to actually read the reviews. If they genuinely care about the game in question, they're going to want to read a review on it to get a better idea of whether they'll enjoy it or not. In the words of Colin Moriarty, if you take the time to read 2,000 words about a game you really care about, you are going to get way more out of that review than if you just looked at the score. I personally feel like scores can sabotage that behavior and mindset for a lot of people looking to just get a quick opinion.
Vulture! What?
Long time no see. We're going to have so much fun.
Sorry, no time to talk.
The letter grades method could be a very interesting one if done correctly. But similar to point scores, I feel like they may have this issue of having too big of gaps. And what I mean by this is that if you take a 0 to 5 point score system and compare it to a 0 to 10 system, for example, you may start to notice that the latter allows for much bigger conceivable gaps in scoring things. A 3 out of 5 shouldn't be considered a 6 out of 10. That's incomparable in my eyes. It's much harder for people to grasp that a 5 out of 10 is average. That score can really make the game look bad for some people. Game Informer's rating scale interestingly states that a 7 is average. And this again goes back to that issue with cross-referencing different scores with different scales, and how Metacritic aims to combine all of them. But going back to those gaps in the scores, the problem is basically this. The 0 to 5 system conceivably keeps scores much closer together while the 0 to 10 system does not, and it most likely sees more hatred because of this potential for what looks like drastically different scores. The gaming community can have visceral reactions to differing scores or even negative scores for a highly anticipated game. There has to be a balance. Maybe it shouldn't be as general as, oh, this game is bad, or this game is good. But it also shouldn't be as specific as this game is an 8.7 or this one is a 9.2. Some reviewers have a lot of fun parodying this system, and a few random examples are Video Game Donkey.
I give this game a 4 out of 5, 100 out of 5, $100 bill, 100.
And Conan O'Brien.
Out of 44 stars, 35 being great, 11 being not so good, 2 being really good, 1 being horrible, I'd give this about a 15.5. It's a complicated scale, and I know we're going to get complaints about it, but I honestly believe it's the best system.
And thankfully, with this and the fact that the industry is constantly growing and evolving, there are lots of different independent reviewers out there nowadays giving their genuine thoughts and opinions on things. What you really have to consider as a consumer is that these are their opinions, and it can be really helpful to find someone who has a similar opinion to yours. There are so many different options. Embrace it. The debate with video game review scores will probably go on and on for a while, or maybe even forever, but all you really need to know is this. When it comes down to video game reviews, always keep these things in mind. It's opinion. It's subjective. Reviewers should be doing their best to inform the consumer based on that. People have to judge for themselves by reading different reviews and watching the gameplay. So, what makes a good game?